December 16, 1944, 5:30 a.m., the forest explodes, without warning. Thousands of German artillery shells crash into the thin American lines stretched across the Ardennes. Snow-covered trees splinter, telephone wires snap, command posts lose contact. In seconds, within hours, entire sectors of the U.S. First Army are collapsing. This is not a local attack, it is a full-scale offensive, and it is tearing straight through the weakest part of the Allied front. The Ardennes sector had been considered. Quiet, rugged terrain, dense forest, limited road infrastructure. Intelligence assessments suggested the Germans lacked the fuel and manpower to mount major operations there. Veteran divisions had been rotated out for rest. Green units occupied long, thin defensive lines. Some regiments held fronts far wider than doctrine recommended. It was winter. No one expected blitzkrieg in snow. But Hitler had gambled everything on one last offensive in the West Operation Wacht am Rhein. Nearly 200,000 German troops, supported by hundreds of tanks including Panthers and Tigers, smashed into the American the 8th Corps. The objective was audacious: break through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and split the Allied coalition. If successful, it could fracture the Western Front in the first 12 hours. Confusion spreads faster than clarity. Forward observation posts go silent. Cliffs report armor where none was expected. Roads behind the front fill with displaced soldiers and stunned logistics crews trying to understand what is happening. The German assault concentrates on weak seams. Atlasheim Gap and near Schnee, Eifel, American positions are penetrated rapidly. Communications collapse under artillery saturation. German infantry infiltrates through wooded ravines, bypassing strong points and isolating battalions. By midday, the front is no longer a line, it is fragments. Road networks begin to clog. The Ardennes does not offer wide maneuver corridors. It offers narrow, winding roads cutting through forest and small Belgian villages. As German armor advances westward, American supply trucks, artillery units, and support columns attempt to withdraw or reposition. Refugees join the chaos. Belgian civilians flee ahead of the advancing Germans, carts and wagons moving slowly along icy routes. Military police attempt to direct traffic, but bottlenecks multiply. One stalled vehicle can freeze an entire column. Orders become difficult to execute when roads are impassable. Fuel depots near the front are either abandoned or destroyed to prevent capture. In some sectors, German spearheads overrun supply points. Before demolition charges can be set, captured fuel becomes critical for the German advance. Ironically, the offensive depends on seizing Allied gasoline. The German timetable is ruthless. They must move fast before fuel shortages halt their armor. They must break through before Allied air power can respond. And for now, the weather is on their side. Low clouds and heavy fog blanket the Ardennes. Allied fighter bombers remain grounded. Tactical air support, so dominant in previous campaigns, is absent at the worst possible moment. German columns move under concealment. American commanders lose their most reliable advantage. Inside First Army headquarters, reports arrive fragmented and alarming. Entire regiments missing. Contact loss with forward battalions, German armor reported, miles behind what was yesterday's line. The situation map begins to bulge westward. By December 17th, the penetration is unmistakable. German forces under 6th Panzer Army in the north and 5th Panzer Army in the center drive deep into American positions. Bastogne, a critical road hub, becomes a focal point. 7 major roads intersect there. Whoever controls Bastogne controls movement across the sector. Headquarters understands the stakes immediately. If German armor captures Bastogne and pushes toward the Meuse River, the front could rupture completely. Allied supply lines would be severed. The psychological shock alone could destabilize coalition confidence. General Dwight D. Eisenhower receives updates with growing urgency. He does not yet know the full scale of the offensive. Intelligence had failed to detect the concentration of German armor behind the Ardennes. Now reality replaces assumption. The front is hanging by a thread. Reserves must be identified. Divisions must be shifted, but shifting forces in winter, across congested roads, under uncertain enemy pressure, is not simple. Every decision carries risk. Commit reserves too early, and you expose another sector. Wait too long and the breakthrough becomes irreversible at Verdun and Luxembourg staff. Officers work through the night, redrawing boundaries, reallocating artillery, attempting to stabilize what appears to be unraveling. The German offensive is not yet unstoppable, but it is moving faster than expected. On December 18th, the scale of crisis becomes undeniable. The German Bulge deepens. American units retreat under pressure. Some fight stubbornly from isolated pockets. Others withdraw to establish secondary defensive lines. Bastogne is nearly encircled. If it falls quickly, German armor gains unimpeded access to critical road networks leading west. Few remains the German constraint. Speed remains their weapon. Allied air power remains grounded, and headquarters understands a brutal truth. If momentum stays with the Germans for another 72 hours, the Western Front could fracture beyond immediate repair. The Ardennes was supposed to be quiet. Instead, it has become the decisive battlefield of winter. 1944. Snow continues to fall across the forest. Artillery echoes through narrow valleys, and somewhere inside the collapsing front, a question begins to form among Allied commanders. Who can move fast enough to stop this? December 19, 1944. Verdun. The map on the wall no longer resembles a stable front. It shows a deep, dangerous curve. German forces pushing west through the Ardennes, splitting American lines and threatening the Meuse River. Senior Allied commanders gather round the table. Snow falls outside. Reports arrive by the minute. And then George says Patton speaks. He does not ask what might be possible. He states what he intends to do. Third Army will pivot north. Within 48 hours, the room goes quiet. Patton's Third Army is positioned in Lorraine, engaged against German defenses along the Saar. His formations are oriented east, not north. Roads are icy. Units are spread across active sectors. Artillery is registered toward Germany, not Belgium. Reversing direction under winter conditions is not a minor adjustment. It is a full, operational rotation. Yet, Patton has already instructed his staff to draft contingency plans the moment the German offensive began. 3 alternative pivot routes are prepared. Movement tables have been calculated. Corps commanders are alerted. He understands the stakes immediately. If Bastogne falls and the German advance maintains speed, the Bulge could widen into catastrophe. The only way to stop momentum is to strike the southern flank of the German penetration, and that requires fuel, massive amounts of it. Back in Third Army's sector, logistics officers study their ledgers with growing alarm. Fuel stocks are not abundant. The advance across France earlier in the year had consumed reserves aggressively. Winter conditions increase consumption further. Vehicles burn more gasoline in cold starts and difficult terrain. Existing allocations were calculated for continued operations toward the Saar. Now Patton is demanding immediate redirection of armored divisions over long distances, through snow-covered roads. Under blackout conditions, the request exceeds planned distribution limits. Convoys must be railheads adjusted, priority shifted from ongoing operations in Lorraine to an emergency thrust northward. Quartermasters warn that if fuel is concentrated for the pivot, other sectors will temporarily stall. Some supply officers recommend a more gradual redeployment. Patton rejects the premise. Gradual movement will not save Bastogne. Speed will. Verdun. Eisenhower absorbs the numbers. Third Army's proposed pivot requires thousands of tons of gasoline within days. That fuel must be diverted from other formations, including sectors not yet fully stabilized. The risk is real. If the German offensive expands beyond current projections, other Allied armies could find themselves short at a critical moment. Yet, delaying Third Army's movement carries greater danger. Bastogne is already surrounded by elements of the German 5th Panzer Army, the 101st Airborne Division, and fragments of other units are holding, but their perimeter is shrinking. Ammunition is limited. Where that prevents resupply by air, every hour matters. Patton's demand is not modest, it is urgent, and it forces headquarters into rapid reassessment. In staff corridors, the debate sharpens. Some officers argue that committing such a large pivot, based on incomplete intelligence, is reckless. The full scope of German strength is still unclear. What if the main effort lies elsewhere? Others counter that hesitation as precisely what the Germans are exploiting. The offensive depends on momentum and shock. A sudden counterstroke on their exposed flank could shatter their timetable. Eisenhower listens carefully. He knows Patton's reputation: aggressive, impatient, often pushing beyond conventional caution. But this is not a theatrical proposal, it is operational logic. Strike the flank, Sivas supply routes. Relieve Bastogne. Cliff the Bulge from below. The plan is bold. It is also coherent. By December 20th, orders begin to move. Third Army's the 12th Corps, and the 3rd Corps receive instructions to reorient north. Artillery units begin shifting, firing data. Engineers prepare to clear snow-covered routes. Military police coordinate traffic control along predetermined corridors. Convoys line up in darkness. Engines start before dawn. Fuel trucks are given priority. Clearance. Logistics officers watch gauges drop. As reserves are transferred to spearhead divisions, the margin for error narrows with every gallant committed. Patton does not waver. He pushes subordinate commanders to compress timelines further. What was projected as a 3-day becomes a race against the clock. Weather remains harsh. Ice slows columns. Mechanical failures increase, but movement continues. This is no longer about maintaining pressure in Lorraine. It is about saving the front at headquarters. Eisenhower confirms the reallocation. Fuel shipments are redirected northward. Planned operations elsewhere are delayed. The decision is clear. Patton's pivot will be fully supported. It is a calculated risk. If Third Army fails to relieve Bastogne quickly, the diverted resources may weaken other sectors unnecessarily. But if it succeeds, the entire German offensive could begin to unravel. The weight of that calculation settles over the command structure. Patton's demand has reshaped priorities overnight. The broad front strategy temporarily narrows around a single urgent objective: stop the German advance, relieve Bastogne, restore momentum. On December 21st, the lead elements of Third Army begin encountering German resistance south of Bastogne. The pivot, once considered improbable, is now a reality. Armor pushes through narrow forest roads. Infantry rides atop tanks in freezing wind. Artillery trails behind, repositioning for rapid deployment. Fuel consumption remains relentless. Every mile northward burns precious reserves. But speed is being achieved, faster than German planners expected, faster than some Allied officers believed possible. The urgent demand has become an operational fact. Headquarters watches the reports carefully, because the gamble has been made, fuel has been committed, authority has been exercised, and now the outcome will depend on whether Patton's acceleration can outrun German momentum. The Ardennes front is still fragile, but for the first time since December 16th, the Allies are not merely reacting, they are moving to strike back. By mid-December 1944, the situation in the Ardennes had forced Allied headquarters into one of the most difficult logistical calculations of the war. Patton's Third Army had executed a rapid pivot north, a maneuver few believed possible in winter conditions. His units were repositioning with urgency, prepared to strike toward Bastogne, but movement alone was not enough. Armor without fuel was nothing more than steel fixed in place. Granting Patton priority meant depriving other sectors. The Allied front was stretched across Western Europe. Every army required fuel to maintain defensive readiness. Tanks, artillery, tractors, supply vehicles, and reconnaissance units all depended on steady distribution. Fuel was not abundant. Reserves had already been strained by months of advance. Since Normandy, if Patton received the allocation he demanded, other formations would inevitably receive less. Logistics officers laid out the numbers. The requested transfer exceeded scheduled distribution limits. Convoys would have to be rerouted through winter roads already congested with retreating units, civilian refugees, and emergency reinforcements. Snow and ice reduced speed. German air attacks, though limited by weather, remained a threat whenever the skies cleared. The risk was not theoretical. Reallocation meant that certain formations elsewhere might be immobilized if conditions deteriorated. Defensive sectors could lose mobility at precisely the wrong moment. A miscalculation would not simply delay operations, it could create vulnerabilities across the line. Staff officers calculated worst-case scenarios. What if the stalled? What if Bastogne fell before relief arrived? What if the Germans redirected their offensive toward weakened sectors deprived of fuel? Delay carried its own cost. Every hour strengthened German defensive consolidation. Every day without decisive action allowed the offensive to stabilize. Bastogne was more than a town. It was a road hub. It lost permanently, it would complicate any Allied counterstroke and prolong the campaign. The dilemma was stark. Caution preserved balance across the front. Decisive allocation concentrated strengths at a single critical point. The debate inside headquarters was not about personalities. It was about probability. Concentration of resources had historically delivered breakthroughs, but concentration also exposed weaknesses elsewhere. The decision required judgment beyond calculation. Patton's speed offered opportunity. Logistics imposed limitation. Between those two realities stood Supreme Headquarters. General Dwight D. Eisenhower reviewed the reports personally. Operational summaries confirmed that Patton's units were positioned to strike. The pivot had not been theoretical. It was real. Divisions were in motion. Command structures were aligned. If supplied adequately, Third Army could launch a coordinated offensive aimed at relieving Bastogne and disrupting German momentum. The question was not capability. The question was timing. Fuel, delivered in sufficient quantity and delivered quickly, could enable a concentrated counterblow against the German flank. Without it, Patton's maneuver would stall before contact achieved decisive effect. Eisenhower weighed logistics against operational necessity. He understood the strain on the supply system. He understood that other commanders would have to accept reduced allocations. He also understood that hesitation at this moment might cost far more than temporary imbalance. Reports indicated that German forces, though aggressive, were operating at the edge of their own logistical endurance. Their offensive relied on speed and surprise. If the Allied response was equally rapid, the momentum could be reversed before the enemy consolidated gains. If the response was slow, the front might harden into a prolonged winter struggle. Eisenhower considered the broader picture. The Allied coalition required coordination, stability, and confidence. A visible and forceful counterattack would send a clear signal to German command, to Allied governments, and to troops holding defensive lines under pressure. Fuel allocation, therefore, was not merely a logistical adjustment. It was a strategic choice about how to answer the offensive. After weighing the reports, Eisenhower authorized the allocation. Patton would receive the fuel required to sustain the attack. Despite the strain imposed on other sectors, the order set immediate consequences in motion. Convoys were redirected. Distribution tables were amended. Priority codes were reassigned. What had been debates became execution. The effect was measurable. With fuel secured, Third Army maintained momentum. Armored columns advanced despite weather and resistance. The relief of Bastogne became achievable rather than hypothetical. German forces, expecting prolonged Allied hesitation, encountered renewed pressure on their exposed flank. The decision reshaped the winter campaign's outcome. It did not eliminate risk. Other sectors continued operating under tightened supply margins. Logistics remained complex and vulnerable, but the concentration of strength at a decisive point altered the tempo of operations. In war, decisions are often defined less by certainty than by calculated acceptance of risk. Eisenhower chose concentration over dispersion, speed over caution, opportunity over equilibrium. The fuel moved, the attack continued, and the German offensive began to lose the initiative it had gained only days before.